Hey there, friends. Before we start today, I wanted to mention something. Obviously, this episode is a little different from my normal content. I used to do investigative content way back, by myself. I used to look things up, do the research, do the cases, so forth and so on, all alone. And I found those took a lot of time, and as much as they are interesting and I love doing them, it was time I just simply didn't have, so. But I started working with Tom, a friend of mine, on some of these projects. He's done some write-ups for other episodes of things. I've very clearly marked the ones he's done, because they're not really stories, they're investigative pieces instead. Or, I guess, true crime pieces. So anyways, I was working with Tom and kind of had an idea of I wanted to cover some more missing persons cases, something I used to do a long time ago. So, like almost 4 years, whatever. Long time is my point. So I want to thank Tom for taking the time to write these up for me. I do appreciate it. He and I have been working together for a little bit now, and I really do appreciate the time he takes to help me out, as I know that these are difficult to research, remain completely neutral, and actually fill in the blanks where they need to be filled in. So, again, thank you to Tom. Thank you to you if you're listening. He also did include a note from the author, so I do want to go ahead and read that really quick as part of the intro. This entire project has turned into something entirely different than what I had in mind when I set out to begin it. Just narrowing it down to only 4 stories was incredibly difficult. However, it has turned into something that is an honor to undertake. To tell the people stories that they can't tell for themselves. Every missing person is important, and every case matters. And I wholeheartedly agree with him on that, so. Anyways, that's all. Enjoy. Case 1. Teresa Davidson-Murphy's story. In 1999 in Rainier, Oregon, 34-year-old Teresa Davidson was living with her second husband, Richard, and her 13-year-old daughter, Jessica. On October 7th, she dropped Jessica off at a friend's house for a 3-day sleepover, with plans to pick her up on Sunday, October 10th. On this same day, her husband Richard said that he was leaving to go for a solo camping trip for a few days. On Saturday the 9th, Teresa's stepbrother Chris and her daughter Jessica both received strange phone calls from Teresa. In an interview, Chris said that Teresa was alluding to issues with Richard's behavior and spoke about relationship problems. He also pointed out that she was speaking in hushed tones, as if someone were with her and she did not want them to overhear. Jessica also said that she noticed her mother did not sound like herself. While she was supposed to pick up Jessica the next day on the 10th of October, Teresa never showed up. At her home were most of her belongings, including her vehicle, with the keys still in the ignition, but no sign of Teresa herself. In the 26 years since, no signs of the missing mother, nor clues to her whereabouts have ever come to light. In the days leading up to her disappearance, Teresa was living in Rainier, Oregon, with her second husband, a man by the name of Richard Murphy. She had 2 children from her previous marriage, a son named Justin who lived with his father several hours away, and her daughter Jessica. Prior to moving to Rainier, Teresa had been living in Puyallup, Washington, and was reportedly unhappy with the move, saying that she missed her old life in Washington and hated being so far from places and people that she knew. Jessica had a very close relationship with her mother, and considered her as a best friend. Even Teresa's own mother said Jess and Terry were inseparable most of the time. Teresa was close to her stepbrother Chris, and had actually lived with him for a time in Northern California, before moving to Washington State. While in Washington State, Teresa began to date a man that worked for Boeing, and he helped Teresa to improve her life by getting her GED, and even a job at Boeing prior to the couple separating. It was after this that Teresa moved to Puyallup. On that fateful day in October of 1999, Jessica says that her mother dropped her off at Richard's cousin's house, as Jessica and the cousin's daughter played volleyball together and were traveling to Washington for a game. October 7th was the last time she saw her mother, and October 9th was the last time she spoke to her. On the 10th, when Teresa was supposed to be picking her up, she never showed. Jessica was left with Richard's cousin for a week before he returned from his camping trip and came to get her. According to Jessica, when she questioned Richard about her mother's whereabouts, all he would say is that her mother had simply left. Richard told Jessica that he had called the hospitals in the area and the police, but had not filed a missing persons report. Again, at the house remained Teresa's belongings, including her truck with the key in the ignition. Jessica has said that when Richard finally came to get her, that something that struck her as odd was the fact that his large white work van, which was never clean, was spotless, with nothing more than a rain jacket inside. Another thing she quickly caught on to was the way Richard was speaking so derogatorily about Teresa, speculating what she was out doing, or, more accurately, accusing her. Not long after getting her from his cousin's house, Richard told Jessica that she could stay with him, but it was going to cost him a lot of money to take care of her. Or he said that she should contact her biological father and go stay with him. Jessica chose to contact her father, and then shortly afterward she joined her father and older brother in Klamath Falls, Oregon. As Jessica was preparing to leave, if she tried to take something that was her mother's, Richard would act very strange, and would make her leave it, saying things like, "Oh, she's gonna need these whenever she gets back." Jessica has also told interviewers that Teresa's truck was initially found down the road from the house, but that by the time Richard came to get her, the truck was in the driveway. Furthermore, she states that the only significant possession of her mother's that was unaccounted for was her mother's gun. Richard's alibi for the time that Teresa disappeared is that he was on a solo camping trip which he left for on the 7th of October, the same day Jessica went to the sleepover. The 9th was the last time Jessica spoke to her mother by phone. However, she has her doubts about Richard ever going camping, as when she arrived back home, she noticed that all the camping gear was completely untouched, and in the same spot that it had been prior to the alleged camping trip. One of the biggest mysteries of this case is whether Richard really did go camping or not. Jessica doubts the validity of his alibi, but Teresa had also mentioned this camping trip to her mother before she went missing. Yvonne says that Teresa wanted to join him in this trip, but Richard refused and said that he was going alone. Yvonne also pointed out that it has yet to be proven to any degree of satisfaction that he actually went on this trip at all. Marissa Jones of the Vanished podcast reached out to Oregon police to ask if they had ever found any evidence that he had indeed gone camping, but they declined to comment, and also refused a request for Teresa's case file. When further asked about the time frame when Teresa first went missing, Yvonne said that she had received a phone call from Richard saying that Teresa had taken off with her gun, but that he wasn't worried about it as she can take care of herself. The couple of times she called Richard after that, she said that she asked to speak to Jessica, but that Richard wouldn't let her. Among her other unanswered questions are why her keys were left in the truck. Also, while Teresa's truck was registered in her name, somehow after her disappearance, Richard sold the truck. She also reiterates that the only belongings of Teresa's that were never accounted for are the clothes that she was wearing when she vanished and her pistol. Jessica feels that Richard absolutely had something to do with her mother's disappearance, or at least some kind of knowledge about what happened to her. It was only a month or a month and a half that Teresa had been missing when Richard brought his new girlfriend into the picture. And while he and Teresa had only been married for a little over a year, this definitely comes off as a huge red flag. Allegedly, he put all of Teresa's belongings into a storage unit and then never paid the bill on it. And so, since then, all of her things have been auctioned off, denying her family of even having a little piece of her, or at least the things that she held dear. It wasn't until October 23rd, 1999, that Teresa's sister-in-law filed the official missing persons report. At the time of this writing, it has been over 25 years since Teresa was last seen alive by anyone, and no definitive clues have ever surfaced as to what happened to her, or where she went. The gun, too, is to this day unaccounted for. If you have any information on the disappearance of Teresa Davidson-Murphy, or the missing gun, please do contact the Crime Stoppers of Oregon. Case 2. The story of Matthew Hulse. Matthew Hulse was a 44-year-old in 2014 and was dealing with alcoholism and found himself homeless for a time. To sustain himself, Matthew worked odd jobs, fixed up things that he found in the trash, and just about anything he could do in order to make a few dollars here and there. Eventually, he found 2 men who took him in as a roommate, though we only know their first names, Pete and Jason, and not much else. It seems the person who has been trying the hardest to find some clues as to what happened to Matt is his longtime friend Eric, who met Matt in 2004 in Columbia, Missouri, while Eric was traveling with 2 other friends. The pair hit it off immediately as they shared a kind of street smarts the others didn't possess. At the Rainbow Gathering in California, the pair actually ended up splitting off from Eric's original group and carried on traveling together, becoming best friends quite quickly. Eventually, Matt and Eric returned to Eric's hometown of Madison, Wisconsin, where Matt lived sporadically for the next 10 years. But Matt also drifted around a lot, spending time away from Madison, then coming back for a while before leaving again, living a transient life. Matt was from Columbia, Missouri, and often returned to that general area to find work in the form of mostly odd jobs. Eric says that Matt's issues with alcohol affected his ability to hold down a steady job. Matt's struggles often put strain on his relationships, driving wedges between him and his family, and sometimes even alienating him from his best friend, Eric. Several times, Matt was able to sober up for a while, but he always fell back into his alcoholism. There were times where he ended up living with his elder sister at her home in Kansas, until he was finally asked to leave by her after he fell off the wagon. This was followed by a brief period where his sister had no idea where he was, and even once he made contact again, she says they were never as close as they had been previously. At the time, the fall of 2014, he had been living with his eldest sister in Columbia, Missouri, when he was asked by her boyfriend to leave. Allegedly, he and Matt never got along as the boyfriend didn't think highly of Matt's sister taking in a homeless alcoholic. For a while afterward, it is believed that he couch surfed while he was waiting on a chance to get back to Madison to give it another try there for at least a little while. It's during this time frame he came to be staying with Pete and Jason. Eric says that over the years he had heard Matt talk about these 2. He'd heard stories about them. He claimed he never heard any stories that made them sound violent or crazy, just the normal stories a friend would tell about other friends. Matt's sister at some point had also become worried about him and allegedly sent for a wellness check at Pete and Jason's home. Eric says there's a discrepancy in the actual date of Matthew going missing. He says the date found online says September 16th, 2014, but he claims the actual date that he filed it was December 18th, 2014. Matt's sister Sue said when she first heard her brother was missing that maybe he had self-deleted, feeling that, given his lifestyle, it was certainly a possibility. At one point, the detective in charge of the case contacted her and said that he wanted to take a cadaver dog to Jason and Pete's residence, just to see if there was something there. But the detective never got back with her on any further news on this. After he filed the missing person report, Eric said that he tried to get in touch with the Columbia Police Department, but never had any real help from them. To the police, he was just another homeless addict. So, to them, he was a very low priority case. Sadly, this is not an uncommon theme in so many missing person cases, and especially so if they are someone with an addiction or history of being homeless. That's not to say to a degree that the authorities have a point. Due to his transient lifestyle and knack for dropping out of contact for sometimes weeks, Matt's father at one point is told of a time when Matt dropped out of contact for 3 months. So it's really hard to know a lot of what may have been truly going on with Matt at the time he disappeared, or what factors in his life might have even led to him vanishing without a trace so completely that even going on 11 years after he was last seen, no trace of Matthew Hulse has ever been found. It is truly a case where there is frustrating little that we can say for certain as to just what might have been going on with Matt, or what could have possibly led to his sudden disappearance. Even Matt's parents did not seem overly concerned. They weren't even the people to file the missing persons report. Eric was. Perhaps one of the more suspicious, if not outright disturbing things to occur in the wake of Matt's disappearance was the discovery of several of his possessions at the home he shared with Jason and Pete. Allegedly, Matt's sister found many of Matt's belongings on the front porch of the home, including his bicycle. This struck Eric as an odd thing for Matt to have left behind, because it was his primary form of transportation. Other things found were his backpack, ID and cell phone, and food stamp card. All things Matt would have taken with him had he left voluntarily. All these things Matt would need were left behind, yet he was nowhere to be found. The best answer Jason or Pete would provide was that they had no idea where Matt had gone, or why he would have left such important things behind. Eric says that he knows Matt can become combative when he's drunk, citing that there were times when even he and Matt had some physical confrontations. His theory is that maybe such a confrontation took place between the roommates, and perhaps Matt was hurt, and the pair panicked. However, no one has seen Jason or Pete either. Not long after Matt's disappearance, they suddenly moved out of that house. There's really not much more that is known about the pair of men that Matt had been living with, nor do we have any real solid leads or theories on why Matt might have vanished. And maybe that's unsatisfying, but the important thing to remember about Matt and about untold numbers of people like him is that, despite their flaws, their problems, their addictions, they are still people, and their stories should be heard. Their stories should be and deserve to be told. Matt Hulse's sister has said that anytime she sees a homeless person sleeping on a bench, that she has to stop her car and approach them, get a good look at their face, just on the off chance that it's her little brother. Even people with problems have family and loved ones, people who deserve answers. So, if you have any information about Matthew Hulse, please contact the Columbia Police Department. Case 3, the story of Jonathan Estes. A 35-year-old Jonathan Estes and his estranged wife, Cindy, had a heated altercation on May 31st, 2018. The pair had been separated, and after the fight, Jonathan had returned to the house he had been staying at during this period. In the wake of this, Cindy called the police and reported that Jonathan had assaulted and SA'd her. She also reported that she had struck him with her vehicle. Just days later, on June 2nd, 2018, police went searching for Jonathan to question him about the allegations. He reportedly told 2 people that he was going down to the sheriff's office to settle the allegations, but Jonathan Estes never made it to his destination, and no one has seen or heard from him since. Jonathan Estes was a hard-working guy from Bogachito in Lincoln County, Mississippi. Oftentimes, he found himself traveling out of state for work, so his life was pretty active. He was struggling to get back on his feet after his wife Cindy had told him she wanted a divorce. This probably would have been very devastating for Jonathan, as once he became a father, his older sister said his entire life revolved around his kids, and making sure they got to do the things they wanted, including lots of travel and adventure seeking. Jonathan met Cindy through a friend at church. Not long after the pair were married, their daughter, Amy, was born, followed a couple of years later by their son Bryce. The children were his entire world, according to Jonathan's sister. Though there were certainly challenges and strains at home due to having 2 young children and a career that often had him traveling. Jonathan was particularly close to his son Bryce, who has often been called his sidekick. If Jonathan was home, then Bryce was with him. The pair hunted and fished together. They did archery as well as riding ATVs. Any activity the duo could share, they seemed to do. But John didn't leave Amy out by any means. Amy also often accompanied John on hunting trips. She was involved in archery, and John even coached her soccer team for a time. The source of friction between John and Cindy really seemed to come down to the fact that John worked in construction and was often out of state working on different projects. Several times they had separated and reconciled over the strain his being away often caused on the marriage. According to what John told some of his friends, he was completely blindsided in April of 2018 when on a morning he was supposed to be leaving for a job, Cindy woke him up to tell him that she wanted a divorce. The night before, everything had been fine, so John really never saw this coming at all. Despite any lingering hard feelings over the divorce, John moved forward in his life, renting his own house and focusing on what had always mattered the most, providing for his kids. During this time, John was also working on a government project in Texas, so he was making some good money through this emotionally rocky period. Jonathan was also making plans for the future. A future that involved him not being gone on the road so much and having a more local job. He was even talking about Bryce coming to live with him. It seemed that, despite the dissolution of his marriage to Cindy, John was excited to be starting a new chapter in his life, free of what had turned into a toxic relationship. It was pretty clear to others that John was excited to be starting over as a single dad, and that he was making solid plans that involved him being around more often and not out on the road all the time for work. According to his sister, John certainly wasn't depressed or shutting down over the separation and divorce. Talking to any of the people closest to Jonathan, a pretty clear picture of him emerges very quickly. Even his boss had a very high opinion of John due to his unwavering work ethic. Jonathan had worked for him for nearly 15 years, and had worked with him at other places prior to that. When asked about the kind of person that Jonathan was, his best friend, Kevin, immediately replied with, he was a very hard worker. That seems to be one of the most common things associated with John, his work ethic. The other one is that John was a very compassionate person that would help anyone out without the slightest expectation of anything in return. And the consensus is that no one really had anything bad to say about him, and had never heard anyone else say anything bad either. He was a very loving and lovable guy. Cindy, on the other hand, is said to have always seemed like she had some kind of chip on her shoulder. Kevin has said that she always seemed like she might have been ill, or otherwise seemed like she was in some kind of hurry to leave. It seemed like if she wasn't in control, that she would try to either start a fight or otherwise orchestrate it so that she could leave. On May the 10th, John and Cindy had an altercation that started as an argument over who was going to get certain objects around the house. A video exists of part of this argument, which John began to record after the police had already been called. I've heard part of the audio, and Jonathan is completely calm from what I have heard. It's unclear exactly why he started recording, if he was just trying to perhaps document her behavior because she had tried to make false accusations in the past, or if maybe he was in fear and using the recording to protect himself if she tried to become violent. In the recording, Cindy can be heard in the background in the kitchen. Jonathan states that he is waiting for the police to arrive, and Cindy can be heard telling him to stay standing right in the door where he is until they do. As the recording continues, John reiterates for the recording what their entire argument was about, and Cindy can be heard banging around the kitchen as she clearly becomes more angry. At some point, the children come in and John has an emotional interaction with them. After the children leave, Cindy brings the conversation straight back to the original argument. While Jonathan remains completely calm, Cindy's tone becomes vindictive, almost sinister as she declares, "It's on now. I'll use everything I have to make sure you never see those kids again." Just as a side note here, I have to say that it was one of those tones that kind of made my blood run cold to hear. Whether what she was saying was a physical threat or a metaphorical one from the divorce standpoint, the tone itself is very much a threat, and that's where I'll leave that. It's pretty clear that the pair had quite a tumultuous relationship. It's also apparently known that neither of them had been completely faithful during the marriage, and John confronts Cindy saying that he knows what she's been getting up to. He confronts her with some pretty scandalous allegations of his own. Cindy denies these, of course, while John tells her he has proof on his phone. There is some back and forth between the pair about the proof, and Cindy questioning the authenticity, claiming that John could have manufactured it. Now, I'm unsure of what allegations Cindy might have made when she called the police this particular time, but this was 3 weeks before their final known altercation on May 31st. I will also say that it's a fairly safe bet that the accusations she made on the 31st were probably exaggerated, if not outright fictitious. Cindy definitely had a vindictive streak to her, and she seemed to know that the best way she could hurt him would be to do something that meant he would be unable to see his children. Something that she certainly made her intent to do very clear. So, it's not a stretch to see her using the law to try and justify not letting him have time with his kids. It has been 7 years now since anyone has seen or heard from Jonathan Estes, and it really feels like we are no closer to having satisfactory answers than we were on that day in 2018 when John left to go to the sheriff's department and never arrived. And, of course, if you have any information about Jonathan Estes, please contact the Lincoln County Sheriff's Department in Brookehaven, Mississippi. Case 4. The story of Akia Eggleston. When I first began writing this, I truly had no idea just how heartbreaking this particular case was going to be. In this story, there are long stretches of nothing happening. No new information, no developments, until suddenly, there is. Akia Eggleston of Baltimore, Maryland was 22, mother of a 2-year-old daughter with a second baby on the way. There were plans in place for her to move in with her boyfriend and the father of her second child, Michael Robertson. The couple had been saving up to make a down payment on a new place together. However, that would sadly never come to pass. The last time Akia Eggleston was seen was on May 3rd, 2018, when she was seen on a security camera withdrawing money from her bank account at the ATM in Baltimore, Maryland. 22 years old and 8 months pregnant, Akia was in no condition to travel far from her bed, much less her home, as her pregnancy had been determined to be a high risk by her doctor. Akia also had a 2-year-old daughter and was looking forward to her baby shower, where she was planning on revealing the gender of her impending baby, as she had just learned she was expecting a baby boy. What happened to Akia? Why was she suddenly withdrawing money she had been working so hard to save? Are her and her baby okay? All of these questions were left to haunt Akia's family in the days to come, in the wake of her tragic disappearance. No one could ever say that Akia's life had been easy. When she was only 18, her mother passed away. Her biological father was already deceased and had never played an active role in her life. So, her support network came down to her grandparents, siblings, her stepfather, and his new wife. Despite the hardships that she faced, Akia was a resilient young woman who desired to succeed in life. So, what we know. At the time she went missing, she had a 2-year-old daughter and was expecting a boy. Akia had been excitedly planning to have her baby shower on the 7th of May, where she planned to announce the gender of said unborn baby. Although the expecting mother had been placed on bed rest due to her pregnancy being the high risk, nothing could stifle her excitement at becoming a mother a second time. Sadly, she never got to share that moment with her family, nor to celebrate with her friends this wonderful news, because Akia never showed up for her own baby shower. This immediate red flag set her family in motion to begin searching for the 8-month pregnant Akia. One of the most terrifying aspects of this story was that no one really had any information on the whereabouts of Akia, past the security camera footage of her at the ATM withdrawing hundreds of dollars that she had been working to save. So, the assumed date of her disappearance is May 3rd. That's when all of her social media posts stopped, and it was the last time she had been seen by family or friends. However, the Baltimore PD was reluctant to get involved until June. After Akia's due date came and went, and there were no records of her having given birth, it was the FBI that stepped in, offering a reward for any information leading to the discovery of Akia or her baby. According to Akia's family, the Baltimore PD had to be prompted, or even outright antagonized, in order for them to really do anything. And when the FBI finally stepped in, that was when they finally truly felt that someone was trying to find their loved one. At the time of her disappearance, due to ultrasounds showing that her baby was breech, possibly due to Akia's petite stature, the expecting mother had been on bed rest and had been restricted on the things that she could do. Unable to drive, and without a vehicle even if she could have, it was one of Akia's friends that had taken her to the ATM and then returned her home. Immediately, Robertson was questioned about Akia's whereabouts. As she had been preparing to move in with him in the days leading up to her disappearance, many thought that maybe she had just suddenly done so. But he claimed to have not had contact with her. No one had seen any signs of her moving things from her apartment, but also when approached for any surveillance footage, the complex manager said that the cameras were, of course, broken. Thus, no footage of Akia's building from the time of her disappearance exists. The friend who had given her the ride to the bank later passed away after a battle with a chronic illness, leaving many questions unanswered. When her family tried to bag some items and turn them into the police as potential evidence, they declined to accept them, due to an issue with the chain of custody, meaning that possibly valuable insight and information was completely discounted and never even properly examined. At one point, even after Akia had gone missing, her friends found out that squatters had taken up residence inside of her townhome. This kind of begs the question: how hard had the police even been trying to keep it as a secure crime scene in the days after Akia had been reported as missing? A truly baffling aspect of this case, exacerbated by the broken security cameras, is the furniture, clothing, and other belongings that were removed from Akia's home in the days after her disappearance. No witness reports have ever emerged saying anyone was seen removing things from the dwelling, None of Akia's missing effects have ever turned up in any pawn shops, flea markets, or second-hand stores. So where did Akia's things go? How had no one seen them being removed from what should have been treated as a crime scene? It's certainly not like she was able to move them herself when she could barely walk due to her condition. When she disappeared, Akia did have her wallet, her identification, and her phone with her. Her family repeatedly asked police if they had been able to ping and locate her phone, but the only answer they ever got was that the phone was not found. Akia's stepfather and his wife attempted to get copies of her phone record from the wireless carrier, but were denied on the grounds that they did not have Akia's password. More potential leads, never to be looked into. All of these tragic mishandlings of this case would ultimately come back to haunt authorities and Akia's family in 2023, when after 5 years, the father of Akia's unborn child, Michael Robertson, was arrested and found guilty on 2 counts of murder. Although it was late in coming, Akia's family finally had their closure and had their answers. After Akia went missing, Robertson had left Baltimore and moved to the state of Michigan, where U.S. Marshals found and arrested him on February of 2022. Without Akia or the baby's remains, the case built against Robertson was largely circumstantial. But the prosecution was able to use what they had to build a strong enough case against him that Robertson was convicted on the 2 counts of murder in the first degree, and is now serving the rest of his days in a prison. It turns out, Robertson had been carrying out an affair with another 22-year-old woman the entire time he had been with Akia. And while the arrest and guilty verdict are of some solace to her family, Akia's family still feels the pain of not being able to lay her and her baby boy, Anubis, to rest properly. And that is a pain that will likely never be resolved. So that, my friends, was something a little different for the channel. Whenever Tom and I approached this project initially, it was with some skepticism that it would do well on the channel, that it would be received well by the audience, or that it would even be worth the time to do, because I don't really do true crime much, but the more we discussed it, and the more he I guess I would say the more he came back with the information and started looking into it, and after I read what he was writing, I wholeheartedly accepted that this was something that we should do. Obviously, Tom did a significant portion of the heavy lifting here. He did a lot of I can't say a lot of, he did all of the research and the write-up. So, a huge thank you to Tom. I really do appreciate him. Working with him has been an absolute pleasure. And I intend to work with him. I intend to continue to work with him is what I meant to say. And we have a lot more planned, but this is the first of this kind of style, I guess, that we're going to do. I'm not saying I'm going to become a true crime channel. I'm not saying I'm going to become a missing persons case kind of channel. Some of you will know that I used to do these occasionally, under a different persona to some extent. But this is just something that I felt was necessary to do. And his write-ups were, in my opinion, of course, respectful and informative. So again, thank you to Tom. And you, listeners, for listening to the video to this point. These stories were deep and, a bit hard to read emotionally, obviously. So, thank you to everyone who did listen to this point. If you want more content like this, please do hit the like button. If you're new to the channel and, again, want more content like this, please hit the subscribe button as well. You can also leave me a comment with your thoughts on the cases, how you feel about this kind of content, whether or not you think this is a bad road for me to start down. And again, I'm not saying this is a permanent or consistent thing. It's just something I want to do every once in a while to kind of break away from just the Reddit-style true scary stories. So, I don't know. Maybe it flops hard and nobody watches it. Maybe you all hate it. I don't know. We'll see. So, You can listen to the podcast on Spotify, on Audible, on all those other platforms, Apple as well. You can join Patreon or memberships, get early access to content like this. Patreon link down below, join button also down below the video. You can do a super thanks, which is just a tip to the channel. Check out the live streams I do on Saturdays or whenever I'm live, honestly. And yeah. All that said, friends, I hope you have a beautiful day. I hope I see you again here very soon. But until next time, remember you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you are the best you that you can be. Don't forget it. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Till next time, my friends, much love, and sleep well.